Thanks very much. We are here at the Santon Convention Center at the African Investment Forum. We just have a stream of guests coming in wanting to speak to us and telling us what they're up to here at the forum. So the African Development Bank is a very key player in organizing this particular event. It's one of the founders of the AIF, the Africa Investment Forum. And with me now I have Jennifer Blank. She's the Vice President for Agriculture, Human and Social Development at the African Bank. And of course, agriculture has been such an important issue that's been discussed here. Apparently there's some 60% of arable land on the continent that just hasn't been tapped just yet. We have challenges of climate change and so on and so forth, but there is potential there if we can ensure that we have the technologies to tap on that. But she's going to tell us a bit more about what's been going on here at the forum. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Super. So agriculture is a big deal on the continent. Lots of scope for investment there. Just tell us what's been discussed here.
Well, I mean, if you look at agriculture, the truth of the matter is you have 60 to 70% of people in Africa working in agriculture, and yet it only contributes about 25% to GDP. So it shows it's a massive unexploited potential, particularly given that most of what is exported from Africa is sort of raw materials, raw goods, cassava, cocoa beans, and what we import back are the processed goods. That means we're exporting jobs. We're exporting revenue. So that's what we're attacking here today. So there's a number of things that are going on, and some of it's building on the discussion last year. We have a number of boardrooms, as you might have heard of, and there we're talking about specific projects where we're trying to crowd in investment because that's what's going to make the difference. Yes. And these are good business opportunities. You know, we're looking at agriculture as a business, not as a way of life, but especially higher value added. And so, you know, I mean, whether it's sugar in Egypt or it's dairy in Angola, whether it's cotton value chains in Burkina Faso and textiles, these are the sorts of things that we're doing here, but also big plays. So for example, looking at special agro-industrial processing zones. How can we get all the hard and soft infrastructure into the rural areas, partly funded obviously by government, to make it attractive for the private sector to go in to create those great jobs?
And what about the issue of climate change and water scarcity around the continent and so on? How are we going to deal with those factors?
Well, that's a big issue, and I think, well, first of all, if you just look at productivity in general, it's low in Africa in agriculture. In fact, it hasn't changed much in the last 100 years. And so we're doing some big pushes on that just to get the right sorts of crops, technologies to farmers at scale, which has not been happening. But when we're doing that, we're thinking very much about climate. And the fact that the climate is changing and the farmers are on the front line, agriculture's on the front line. So things, I mean, a lot exist. Things like drought-resistant maize, but it doesn't always get to the farmers. I mean, these are things that can really save them if you have a crisis. Yeah. So a lot of it is about adaptation, and we're certainly thinking about this all along sort of the value chain.
Now, we know that it's not your job to tell us how much has been raised. We're going to learn that later. But has there been quite an appetite for the agricultural sector? Are we going to see, you know, some decent money being invested in that area, and what countries?
Well, absolutely. I think, first of all, if you look at the opening plenary, you saw the president of Ghana making a big plea for agriculture. I think in development, agriculture really was left behind, and now everybody understands that this is a really big, exciting area. Yeah. And even if you look between last year and this year, last year we had one of these boardrooms on cocoa, the cocoa sector, and how we could build it up in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And we just signed a deal yesterday for $600 million going into Ghana to the cocoa bod to really help them build out so it just gives you an idea, to help them build out their whole value chain in cocoa. Yes. I can tell you, between last year and this year, last year I was excited we had some agriculture on the agenda. Now I've been pulled from, you know, discussion to discussion. So it's very high on the agenda, and it just kind of happened this year. So that's been really great, and I think we're going to have a lot of interesting things coming out of this year.
Super, Jennifer. Thank you very much for your time. And just to touch on what she was talking about in terms of the cocoa, it seems as though cocoa, there's about 70% of the world's cocoa comes from Ghana and the Ivory Coast. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And of course we eat all these lovely chocolates from Europe and everything else. So doesn't it make sense for us to actually add value to what we have here on the continent? And these are some of the investments that are beginning to be made. That is, you take your raw material, add value to it here, and get the benefit of the pricing and the jobs that come with it here on the continent, instead of, as Jennifer says, just giving it away elsewhere. All right, well, we'll continue with coverage here at the Santon Convention Center. It's the last day of the Africa Investment Forum, and we are excitedly waiting for that number. How much has been pledged to this conference in terms of the number of the money that's going to be invested on the African continent? We badly need investment on the African continent. I mean, just the other day I was reading that the International Energy Agency was saying that Africa needs investment of $2.4 trillion between now and 2040, just in order for us to get our energy house in order. So we need all the cash that we can get as a continent. Back to you in studio.